Thank you, Alex, for coming on and joining me on the show today. I really appreciate you taking the time. You're this co-founder and CEO of a really interesting project called WorldCoin. It's a privacy-preserving proof-of-personhood protocol. You guys are looking to onboard billions with a B, billions of users, onto crypto and Web3, and you're giving out free money in the form of WorldCoin to, incentivize them to do so. It's a really interesting project. You're using iris scanning orbs, and there's just a lot of interesting dimensions of what you're doing. So I'm looking forward to digging into all that. But before we get there, for those who don't know you, it would be great to just, hear your story from as early as you're willing to start to where you are today and some of the decisions you made along the way.
All right. Thanks for having me. All right. So I started working on WorldCoin at this point roughly 2 years ago. So my co-founder Sam Altman, he basically pulled me out of Caltech in Los Angeles. Back then I was doing research in theoretical physics and kind of more specifically, how can you use neural networks to make quite complicated quantum mechanical simulations faster and less computational intensive, because these are really, really hard to compute. And that's a big problem. And so I did this for, on and off quite some time. So even during my undergrad, I did a lot of research there in that space. Also did mechanical engineering as an undergrad in parallel. I was always building things. So I had my first project / company when I was, 17, basically out of high school, which was back then quite a crazy story. I think I never really publicly talked about that, but it was a bark beetle monitoring system, actually, like a kind of a machine that counts those bark beetles in forests and then makes predictions, and therefore helps forest workers to kind of predict where to go and how to act on it. And then after that, I was building vertical farming systems. And then after that, basically kind of a small AI research company. And then after that, all in on AI research for like 1.5 years, and then WorldCoin. So that's kind of the short summary of my story. And then so basically at Caltech, I got a message from Max Novenstern back then, which co-founded WorldCoin with Sam 6 months earlier, roughly. So they already started working on it. It was a little bit on and off because Max still had a job. Sam obviously has a job. Back then, he was already CEO of OpenAI. And I actually came for an interview at WorldCoin. That's how it started, as a software engineer, which is quite funny looking backwards. So then I interviewed with Max, interviewed with Sam, and all of us became quite good friends quickly. And then a little bit later, I became equal co-founder, and we basically brought in the whole founding team, which are many people from my time at university and research. And then the company was very, very small for roughly a year. So basically pre-Series A. So Sam funded the company throughout seed. We built prototypes. And kind of just sketched everything out, did early testings, things like that. And then Chris Dixon from Andreessen led our Series A. And then things became much more serious, much bigger. And I became clear that I will not do physics research anymore. At this point, the company is at Series B stage. The team is around 100 people. And the big thing right now is actually just getting ready for launch, which will be later this year. So it's a quite interesting time. The team is growing quickly. The tech is finally there. So it's I don't know. It's kind of crazy. Like, the company always goes through different stages so quickly. Like every 3 months, the company feels very differently than it did before. So yeah, that was, I think, a lot of things you can go deeper in, but that's kind of the short story.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like a very interesting time for WorldCoin, and it's an interesting story, no doubt. You mentioned, early on sort of how you got started in all this. Sam sort of plucked you out of Caltech. I'm curious, was that for the purpose of working on WorldCoin at the time? did he just see some talent and identified you as someone he wanted to work with on something or have work on something that he was working on, maybe at OpenAI or something new, sort of not knowing at the time? And then, like you said, you walked in and took an interview as a software engineer, and lo and behold, now you're running the thing. How did that sort of transition occur over time? Sam obviously sees, from his time at YC, he's seen, as many founders as just about anyone. And I know he said great things about you. Might be a little bit hard to like answer the question, I guess, but I'm curious what you think he might have seen in you and sort of how that genesis came about.
Yeah, I don't, we would need to ask him that. So I really had a very standard, I mean, there's nothing standard with Sam, of course, in that sense, but I had an actual just standard interview with him. And it was back then in his living room on a Sunday. And Sam asks very interesting interview questions. I think back then it was kind of explain me the standard model in theoretical physics, which back then he was interested in. And so we just had a very, actually quite deep and technical conversation about both physics, but then also just personally, quite intense one too. And then we had like, I don't know, a few more meetings. We spent some time. We had some walks together, and then I became co-founder of Worldcoin. So it was really focused on Worldcoin back then. Now we obviously talk about much more than only Worldcoin, but back then that's how it started. Yeah, what he saw, we would need to ask him. But I think the big thing he's always looking for is rate of progress. Certainly when we now judge people, that's kind of the big thing. It's like, how fast are people moving? How fast are people learning? That's kind of the big decision criteria always.
Yeah, I know that's something, I one of the people I have learned a lot from listening to podcasts. Is fortunate to have him on the podcast as well, and just reading, stuff that he's put out over the years. Keith Boy, he talks about that, rate of growth as one of the things you want to see in a person, and the person's rate of growth ideally has to be, faster than the company that you're trying to build. And when the person's not growing quite as fast as the company, they're going to sort of fall behind and not be as useful anymore. Worldcoin, we'll get into it later, but if you're going to get to 1 billion users, you need to grow really fast. So you obviously need to have people on board who are growing, exceptionally quickly. We could go all sorts of places, but I'm curious, I guess, to hear maybe two things on this point. One, how do you go about trying to identify people's rate of growth, and having grown the team or helped grow the team, at least from, the few of you that it was to start to now about 100 people, I think you said. And secondarily, how have you focused on increasing your own rate of growth over, 20 some odd years of life so far?
All right. Okay.
Big question.
That's the big one. Actually, identifying rate of growth is kind of, as you get a larger kind of set of data points and you work with more people, it becomes relatively easy somewhat, because there's just people in a company like ours, and I think probably every startup, just constantly surprise you when they come back like 1 week later and they just did something you did not ask them to do, and they came up with this very creative new solution to things. They become better and better at managing things, project managing things. So there's just very clear outliers, and you want to find those people and you want to reward those people as much as you can always. I mean, all of that being said, with that big note that I'm a CEO since like a year now. So it's there's certainly much more experienced people that could answer to that. But yeah, I think obviously it depends on the person, it depends on the field, but the clear outliers you definitely just see. They surprise you, no matter which age, no matter which background they have. They just always move faster than everyone else around them. So, and that's certainly the case in our company. We have a few of those people here that just are incredibly talented, and we just try to give them more responsibility, along the way. And actually, that's like this one thing. This one counterintuitive thing I learned from Sam much more than from anyone else. And I know for kind of Silicon Valley native people, that's not a new thing, but this idea to give young and talented, ambitious people much more responsibility that they think they can handle, and just let them go with that. So that you really look for talent much more than for experience. That is certainly like this big surprise to me in the company, right? Where you we had kind of for basically every role in the company, you had candidates from very kind of all varying kinds of experience from all the big companies, often tens of years of experience. And then many times we have chosen to go with someone who's very early in their career, and they definitely outperformed. So that's one. For me personally, I was actually discussing this yesterday internally here. I mean, I'm the first year of Worldcoin, I was not CEO. I was basically running engineering. I mean, back then I didn't even have formally a title, I think, but it would have been CTO. So, and then a year ago I became CEO, and I never had a job before, right? So I like those very basic concepts, like doing reference calls and all of those things I didn't have. So I was just sitting down reading as much books as I could, and kind of learn as much as I could. Of course, I had a kind of a great set of mentors that definitely helped, but there's still so much to learn. And before that, I think the big thing I just always try to do in my life is just maximize on speed. I'm obsessed with speed across everything I do. Yeah, I just always try to be faster than everyone around me in whatever I do, and that just really compounds. You can personally handle much more than you think. This is my big learning. So
yeah, it's
very very general answers, but
no, it's useful, and I appreciate you answering sort of both sides of the question in terms of how to identify people and how you think about it yourself as well. And it certainly helps. It sounds like, Sam's belief that, give young people a lot of responsibility. Experience is overrated, talent's underrated. People can handle a lot more than they think they can. Certainly contributed to sort of identifying you as the person who could lead all this. And I'm sure Sam could, elaborate more on that. But I think it's a useful answer nonetheless. Let's talk about WorldCoin and actually what it is for listeners who either haven't heard of it or, maybe have heard some things that aren't so accurate about it, but don't really still know fundamentally what it is or why you guys are building it. I mentioned in the intro, it's, a bit of a tongue twister, but it's a privacy preserving proof of personhood protocol. So if you break that down, it's a protocol like all these other crypto projects. The purpose is basically to provide proof of personhood and to preserve privacy along the way. So let's sort of take that into pieces. Proof of personhood, what is that, and why is that important problem to solve?
Right. So first of all, this is actually just our last blog post. Sorry, we have to get much better with marketing. There's literally no one in the company right now working in marketing and comms. It's 90 engineers and then and researchers and 10 people working on finance and legal. So anyways, that's just one part of the system. So basically when we when Sam and Max back then started working on Worldcoin, and I heard the pitch for the first time, it was really coming from this direction of, all right, the world is about to change big time. AI is really starting to happen, and society doesn't realize it yet, but it's really time to build kind of foundational infrastructure. And in, I don't know, it might be 10 years, it might be 20 years, we might need to do something like UBI or something similar. I don't like the word UBI because it's very kind of obviously politically loaded. But anyways, so we need to build infrastructure. We need to connect the world financially much more than it is today. And so Sam had this very simple idea, which kind of in retrospect sounds very kind of naive, but obviously it turned out to be true, is, all right, let's just launch a token by giving ownership in the token with everyone simply for being a human. Let's also give those people then a unique identity. And by doing that, we should be able to create a really, really large network. And like it's a network-based business, so the larger the network is, the utility increases non-linearly to some degree. People don't agree what that non-linearity is, but it's clearly that there is one. So that was the very basic idea. And then it turned out that to do that, you need to build a lot of technology around it. So both on the crypto side, so like in short, right now, when you look at the WorldCoin system, it comes down to three things. One is kind of a pseudonymous identity system. That's kind of what we just discussed, this proof of personhood part. And we solved that with biometrics, specifically with iris recognition, because it's really the only technology that scales to more than 1 billion people. And we built our custom hardware for this. It was quite a ride. We can talk more about that. So that's piece one. Piece two is you just need to build an app that functions both as a wallet, but also just the on-ramp for people into crypto, into this new infrastructure that other than United States, Europe, and whatever highly developed countries, most people don't have yet. It's a very small space still. And then third, of course, it's the whole protocol layer, right? It's the crypto token itself. There's a lot to solve here, but then also this proof of personhood part is also a protocol that can be used by anyone else to build whatever they want. So these are the three things. It's proof of personhood provided with a hardware device we had to build ourselves. It's an app, and it's a protocol.
Great. So let's start with, what it is today and how it works. I understand you guys have produced this, product called the Orb that is in, I think, 20 some odd countries around the world. Last I saw, announced publicly. You got a bunch of these Orb operators around who are basically going and sort of entrepreneurially, however they can, finding as many people as they can in their local geography to onboard onto WorldCoin, get them to get this wallet after scanning their iris and basically have, be onboarded onto the protocol. Can you talk about like how that works? Not super technically necessarily, but sort of the key elements at a high level that allow you to go around scanning irises, preserving privacy while you're doing it, and getting people set up, in countries around the world from, whether it be somewhere in Africa or, Norway or wherever it may be.
Right. So from the user perspective, what happens is maybe you read about WorldCoin and you want to be part of it. You download an app, the WorldCoin app. It's not online in the United States yet, but in many other countries. All of this is still in beta, by the way. So we're kind of still testing the whole stack. There's a lot of tech that still needs to be built. But anyways, you download this app. The app has some basic functionality that you can use without verifying. So soon there will be on-ramps. So you can buy tokens and things like that. But anyways, so you then, if you actually want to use WorldCoin as the full system, you need to verify with one of those devices. You click on, all right, where can I verify? You see a map. On this map, you see basically one of those stations. You go there and you show up in front of this device we call an orb. It's a sphere around 20 centimeters in diameter. So it's like a basketball kind of thing. Right now they're chrome, later they will be white. And you basically just look at this device and 20 seconds later, you are verified. And then what happens after you're verified is you as a user, you basically get two sets of keys. So public and private keys for the people that are somewhat familiar with cryptocurrencies. And one of those is a normal Ethereum wallet, basically, and the other one is somewhat your identity key pair. So it's not actually coupled to your biometrics. Those two things are separate with zero knowledge proofs. But basically, what those keys allow you to do is to prove to different applications that you are verified with WorldCoin. You're actually a unique, real human being, without telling that application who you actually are. So again, you basically do that with zero knowledge proofs. So that's from the user perspective. And then you also receive actual ownership in the whole thing, in the whole everything we're building, basically. So you receive some amount of WorldCoin tokens that basically give you an ownership in everything that will come. So that's from the user side. From our perspective, we built those devices right now. We actually received our first pre-production batch 3 weeks ago. So now we have many, many more of those devices. And until recently, it only was 30 of them. And so basically, we distribute those devices in the beginning in all big cities, in basically all major geographies that we want to operate in. And we give those devices to orb operators, which are either individuals or businesses that we basically verify, we interview them, and they can then operate devices. And for every sign up they do, they basically earn money at this point in stable coins and later on in also Worldcoin tokens. So that's pretty much it. So you as a user, you read about it, you go to the map, you verify with that, and then you receive your both your identity and the ownership in Worldcoin itself.
Right. And so some people are, there's no shortage of like critics out there, obviously, for anything that's sort of new and somewhat revolutionary. There's always going to be that. But, a lot of people have concerns about scanning their irises and things like that. I understand you guys have like, you didn't just like go into this blind. You really care about privacy. Have a lot of people who are, very experienced and care a lot about privacy within the company. And there's like a 2-step process that sort of double gates it so that, people who have their iris scanned, there's no connecting, their wallet ultimately back to them. Can you explain just a little bit like how that's guarded and how that works and, what you guys thought about when approaching the privacy issue here?
Yeah. So basically we only looked for kind of a technology that, again, lets us verify that you are unique without requiring anything else, without knowing anything about you, right? So that's actually quite hard. So all of those systems you use in your daily life, Face ID, doorknobs, whatever it is that uses biometrics, they do a one-to-one comparison. And that's relatively easy to do. So there's an embedding stored on your phone that knows how you look like. You try to log in, and that matches, and then you can use the phone. For Worldcoin, however, we need to compare you against everyone else. So it's an actually uniqueness check, which makes the comparison a one-to-N comparison. And so all of those kind of phones, Face ID, all of those things, they would basically break down at a few million signups, and you would not be able to distinguish people anymore. And you really hit a wall. So it's not that you just have a constant error rate, but rather it just kind of nearly exponentially explodes, and you just hit a wall and you're not able to verify people anymore. So that's as a short background why we actually need iris recognition. And we had to go quite far there. So we had to build our own lens, we had to build our own imaging system, all of those things. It was quite a heavy lift. So anyways, we take obviously privacy extremely serious because we don't do KYC in that sense. We really just want to check that you're unique, and we want to decouple your wallet and everything about you from that iris code. So what happens basically, and how we preserve your privacy and actually you stay anonymous, is when you sign up with a device, it does some liveness checks to make sure that you're not actually frauding the system, because there are all kinds of attacks already now on the system, right? So people try to sign up with displays or phones or like even dogs. Like we've seen it all. So liveness checks happen first, and then second is we image the iris, and then locally we'll calculate a unique code out of that iris, and then we basically we calculate a hash out of that iris code. So you cannot go back from that actual hash to the iris code. And then the only thing leaving the device is this iris hash. And that gets compared against everyone else. And if that's unique, you basically get whitelisted. But then your actual wallet address is separate from the whitelisting via zero knowledge proofs. So that means that even if I would have your iris hash, so even if for whatever reason, one part of the system would be compromised, no one has any idea who you are. They can only prove that you have verified before, yes or no. There is nothing linking to your wallet, to your name, or towards anything else. And that's obviously extremely exciting. That's something that was not possible until a few years ago, because zero knowledge proofs became kind of cheap and fast only relatively recently.
Right. So if I'm, understanding sort of what you guys are doing and how it works, my next question is like sort of, why is this important, right? So proof of personhood, you mentioned, sort of the genesis for the idea, it sounds like came from, I think it was Sam and Max who were basically saying, artificial general intelligence is closer than most people think. UBI or something like UBI, universal basic income, may be very important. And, currently we don't have the infrastructure globally or really anywhere to, make that happen. But presumably like UBI isn't the only use case that is, enabled by that could be enabled by something like WorldCoin. When you think about WorldCoin as a protocol in the future, beyond sort of the, initial challenge of just onboarding a billion or several billion people, which it's casual to say, but enormously difficult to do, I imagine. What are some of the other use cases you think about that this level of proof of personhood becomes, essential in order to allow X, Y, and Z to happen?
Yeah. So first of all, to your first point, we have this one operating principle we have in the company is scale first. So that's really everything is optimized around that primitive, is how do we get to this billion user number as quickly as we can. That's basically kind of the one big thing we measure. So basically you launch a token. That token initially at least functions as a bootstrapping mechanism, right? Because you basically with the token you create a large network. You need this proof of personhood so the whole system doesn't break down, the incentive mechanisms don't break down, and then in the end, so once you have created a large network, you basically have, let's just go to the extreme case, let's go to 1 billion users or something like that. Well, you have the largest identity network to some degree, you have the widest distributed crypto app or wallet app, and you have the widest distributed token. And those three things itself are obviously quite a big deal. Together, it's obviously way more exciting even. So for this, for the proof of personhood part, this will just unlock a huge new set of applications, because like when you are in crypto, everyone talks about Sybil attacks and whatever. There's just like, even Elon was tweeting about something like that with Twitter, right? Like the bots on Twitter and things like that. This whole notion of who is human and who is not on the internet will become increasingly important. And right now there's just no solution to that. The only thing you could do is KYC, and that's horrible for a bunch of reasons. So that's primitive number one, is like something like that doesn't exist on the internet today. Like a really the largest real human network that can be used by any application to do whatever they want. So like Twitter could use that. Any other social network could use that. Every DeFi app could use that. So all of this is open source, and it's not just kind of for our app or something. Everything is fully open source, and you can use it for whatever you're building. So I think that itself is quite exciting. Then in crypto, if we take a little bit further, so you basically have this notion of who's a unique and real human that enables governance, it enables airdrops, all of those things. Like I guess you've heard all of that at some point. The app is really exciting itself, because I think in many markets, if you take Kenya, for example, you could actually go head on with something like M-Pesa, where you pay 8% transaction fees right now for every transaction you do. Peer-to-peer transactions are actually still a problem in many parts of the world. We hope that we can solve that once we get to sufficient network size, and so on and so forth. Like I could just keep talking about all of this. And I think that the much more interesting piece is actually what happens to the token if it gets to scale, because something like that doesn't exist yet. Like a token that is actually held by many, many users. That will be interesting. I think that no one has the answer for that.
Yeah, I think you've sort of done a decent job of lining up the next question for me. Obviously, you can't tell the answer of what would happen at that scale, but you might be able to speculate, or you might have thought about it a little bit. And just to put things into context, I think there's, I don't know the exact number, maybe you do, but like on the order of 100 million, maybe 200 million people around the world with crypto wallets of any kind today. Um, and you guys are obviously talking about getting to a billion as quick as possible. I've seen 3 years quoted somewhere. I don't know if that's the active goal or, what you guys are operating on, but regardless, you're trying to move really quickly. I think hoping for tens of millions by the end of this year, maybe low tens of millions by the end of this year. Last I heard. So we're talking about, in a matter of a year being, or even 6 months, potentially having a double-digit percentage of all crypto wallet holders around the world having WorldCoin wallets. And then perhaps eventually, WorldCoin wallets, more people have WorldCoin wallets than any other wallet combined potentially. And if you have a token or a wallet with a token that's sort of scaled and spread among so many people all over the world, have you speculated at all as to sort of what that could mean for a token, given that we haven't really seen anything like that? Closest thing, I guess, would be Bitcoin.
I mean, we speculated and we think about it all the time. Like the baseline is definitely, I mean, this is not really the answer you want to hear, but I think one thing we care about a lot right now is how do we hand off governance of that system as quickly as we can to the users. And we are obviously in a great position to do that because we actually have simple resistance. We have an identity system. So that means that we can do quadratic voting, all those kinds of governance mechanisms we actually can do. So that will be one of the functions of the token, is actually governance of the underlying protocol and all the mechanisms. Two, I do expect that actually Eddie from Andreessen, if he's listening to that, he brought up this point, which I really liked, is that Bitcoin went over the years through like thousands of different narratives. Like there was, even from Nick Carter, there was this blog post where you kind of see a plot of narratives of Bitcoin over time. And kind of at every point there has been at least 4, I think, right? It really started with this whole peer-to-peer payment system, right? That kind of was the original headline. And then right now, I think kind of this whole digital gold, sound money, like all of those things are the narratives that are now quite dominant. So my whole point being is that I do actually think that once something like that, it doesn't even have to be WorldCoin, but anything like that becomes to sufficient scale, the users will make up the narrative. And it's quite hard to predict system, right? So in the beginning, we will definitely position it as, okay, right, this is your ownership in the actual network, because I think that's the one thing that is true about Web3 for sure. And that will give you governance over everything that will happen in this ecosystem. But I do think once it gets to scale, new narratives will emerge, and people might use it for peer-to-peer payments, all those kind of things. Even if it's not stable, it will certainly happen in some markets. You already see this happening now. So yeah, this was like a riff, but my short answer being, I think basically no one can predict it.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting riff, and I think people listening will sort of form their own opinions, but it's really hard to know. It's the short answer, and time will tell. But coming back to this, one single goal that you guys have within the company in the near term, which is to reach 1 billion users as quickly as possible. In order to do so, probably with that problem in mind, like how the hell can we possibly do that? You came up with this sort of decentralized sales force, which I don't. You probably have like better comparables in mind to the extent that there are some, but it's a pretty weird and interesting and novel thing, in my view, to have a bunch of people all over the world, not starting with a focus in any particular place, going around with a piece of hardware, physically recruiting people onto the platform in more of like a contractor role than an employee role. It's just a very interesting model that you guys have built. And basically, the more you can get orbs out there to these orb operators and bring on high quality orb operators who are incentivized in a way that's sort of aligned with the greater protocol, and then getting them to up their numbers, probably seeing some best practices amongst them over time and being able to like give them a template or something. It's just a very interesting model. I'm curious like how you guys came about it, what some of the early learnings from seeing, just I think you said 30 are out there so far, seeing those people at work, and hopes for the future of that approach to scaling as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, our team is now basically we start getting a lot of people from Uber and from Airbnb and whatever in our actual growth team. So we try to take as much analogies as we can from mechanisms like that, right? Because at least to some degree it's comparable. You have similar problems of quality control, regulatory, changing environments, all of those kinds of things. So we really heavily lean into that, and we recruit certainly from those places. How we started with that, or how it came up, is that also Sam had this idea back then, because the idea was that it's really hard for kind of a central entity, especially at the scale we want to operate, to launch in all of those markets and understand each of those cities, each of those locations sufficiently well and in the speed we need to, rather rely on local smart entrepreneurs that know their city, know their area, and just give them the responsibility of signing users up and kind of position the orbs in the right place and basically get to incentive alignment. I think that's the general deal of Worldcoin, is you use a token system to get to incentive alignment on every level, right? It starts with the foundation, with the operating company, goes down to the operators, and then to the users. So we have a huge incentive team in the company. And what the learnings are so far, which is actually quite interesting time to talk about it, because we're just right before actually getting to the next scale. So right now we are at 30, but in a few weeks when we talk again, it will be at a few hundred. And that will make a lot of noise, by the way, because one of those orbs is still signing up a lot of people a week. So somewhere between 300 to 1,000, depending on the location, which is a lot. Like if you actually do the math, we get a lot of signups and still. So, well, the learning is you need still to build up a lot of local infrastructure, do all of those quality tests you need to do to make sure that those operators tell the right story, especially in the early days. I think later on it will become less important, but right now you really have to have a tight feedback loop with all of those operators and watch closely what they're doing, and things like that. But the company is we're building up that infrastructure right now, and it's working quite well.
Yeah, so let's talk about the numbers a little bit, because obviously, scale being the goal, you got a long way to go from where you guys are now, but you've already onboarded, I think, last I heard, around 500,000 users. Is that different now, or?
Yeah, it's around 700,000 at this point.
700,000. So it's really a fast pace. And, I think it would be hard pressed to find a different way to do it than the decentralized approach that you guys are taking. But if you 10x to 30x the number of orbs out there, and these orb operators maintain their pace of, several hundred signups per week, I think in some cases you even have operators who are bringing on a couple thousand new signups per week. These numbers like very quickly go up and start to get into the millions and double-digit millions, like we were talking about earlier.
That's right.
Do you have any sort of immediate near-term goals in mind or milestones that you're hoping to achieve? I know like it was contemplated that you guys would end up with like several thousand orbs, I think, by the end of this year. Is that still on the table? I'm curious sort of where the numbers are now, the latest, and where you expect them to go.
Yeah, that's still on the table. However, we definitely had a delay in production. With kind of this whole supply chain problem that I think every larger electronic manufacturer had. And then we also went through manufacturing hell. So the company really had an intense time the last few months. It was kind of our first actual production manufacturing run. And kind of people were sleeping in the office and whatever. Like this we went through this whole thing. So right now the goal is to get to somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 devices by end of the year. You're right, like the signups vary between like 300 to sometimes even like more than 1,000. Like the best, I think the peak we measured was around even 2,000 signups a week. So the numbers get really, really large really quickly. We ourselves are surprised about that. Like, I mean, even where we are right now, we didn't even try. Like at this point, we didn't try to really scale up because it's only 30 devices. There's no comms, there's no marketing yet. So this was really just a testing operation, but the scale that resulted even from that is quite crazy to us. Also, the retention rate is quite crazy. Actually, like we have a significant amount of weekly actives at this point. So yeah, it's I'm already sure when I say those numbers that we will be delayed to some degree because it's manufacturing will be hard, scaling up the company to get there will be hard, but yeah, eventually we will get there. And so next year the goal is to produce around 4,000 of them a month. So final manufacturing capacity will be around 50,000 a year, which is obviously a very, very huge load. So until then, the team will need to grow quite a bit. But yeah, that's our goal. So as usual with projects like that, we are the goals are the same. We had some production glitches with the supply chain, but otherwise nothing really changed since the last 1.5 years.
Yeah, and I think devil's advocate could say like, well, these first 500,000 signups might be easier than the next 500,000, which might be easier than the next 9 million and next 90 million and whatever. It just gets harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this is a fully global operation you guys are hoping to conduct, and theoretically, I don't think there would be any difference in getting. You're only in 20 something countries today, so another one country, shouldn't look any different. Like your next incremental country shouldn't really look any different from, the average of the existing countries. So you could easily see sort of the beginning of the scale there. Is there anything else that sort of you worry about, or are excited about on the contrary of like, these first 500,000 users that we got sort of almost without trying? It might not be this easy all the way, or have you seen sort of reasons to believe early on that this is like actually a sustainable thing, that you just pump more orbs into the system and get better at training the operators to go get users, and this should be like a sustainable pace, or even one that you might be able to increase in the future?
Well, I think actually right now we are pretty much in the hardest, well, I hope at least, in pretty much the hardest environment we will be for at least another year, right? Because the app is kind of constantly increasing in scope. It only became somewhat useful to users like in the last 3 months. So that's one. Like the product was really not there yet. There was no comms marketing effort. So the only thing you hear about Worldcoin at this point are basically the critics, because we're not even trying to communicate to the outside world much at this point. There's no brand. No one is talking about it. There's no awareness. So all of those things are not there yet. It's really just we are on the ground in some cities and we try to measure the basics of the system. So kind of our economics team, of course, the whole tech team, they kind of do separate tests to kind of see that the parts of the systems start working and are working. So whatever we see right now should be for quite some time the lower bound. It's certainly a quite adversary environment at this point. Definitely, however, there will become saturation effects. Like it would be stupid to assume that's not the case. It's hard to predict when they will come. I don't think we will start hitting them in the first 12 months, just given how far out those orbs are spread. But of course, we run through the same curve as any other service that tries to get to scale. So if I would need to take a guess right now, we will go through a few more kind of the beta phase still will be a challenging environment. Once we start actually doing marketing and comms and become much more public about it, things will become easier to some degree at least. And then, of course, when the token actually launches and kind of the whole app has feature parity, things will become a lot easier. And then at some point we will hit saturation effects. But as you just said, it's definitely not my biggest worry because we will operate in so many markets at the same time. So that's like a short rundown of many, many things.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually kind of cool that you guys are sort of bringing on the marketing efforts and things late, because I know for one, I'd seen some of like the initial launch and just a few things I'd say definitely been like sort of under reported on, maybe over criticized, but besides that, under sort of, there's just not that much marketing effort, like you said. But at the same time, I was sort of surprised to go in and be like, okay, 500,000 users, this thing like just launched. It's pretty impressive. And when you do have the marketing efforts there and the brand name starts to carry some weight, obviously not just in the US or anything or in Europe, but around the world, ideally, it'll sort of match the progress of everything that's been going on the ground, and sounds like it's only going to 10x and 100x and so on in the near future. Can you give us a sense? I know we're coming up on time, but can you give us a sense for the roadmap? You talked about, like, you're still in beta right now, but soon coming out of that, and token launch soon around the corner as well. Not holding you to anything, but loose time estimates on when these things can be expected, and just sort of the near term roadmap for WorldCoin. I know you guys just raised fairly recently a lot of money at a large valuation. I think the original round was 25 million at $1 billion, and more recently 100 million at $3 billion. So congratulations on that. Certainly sounds like capital won't be the thing that holds you guys back, at least in these early days. But a lot of work ahead, and curious to hear sort of what your focus is on for immediate next steps.
Yeah. So yeah, everything you just said is correct. So the big focus right now is really still is really just building. So again, the company is at this point only researchers and engineers, and it will stay like that for still some time, because basically we have like a lot of huge Gantt charts and kind of goal docs in the company of all the gates we need to hit from every separate team to actually get that system out of beta and get it ready to scale. And there is still so much to do. It's quite something. So when you work at WorldCoin at this point, there's just a huge amount of different charts and lists, and we just try to hit all of those gates to get ready for mainnet launch. Mainnet launch, we hope, will be later this year. But of course, and I say that with a lot of caution, we will also be sensitive to the market. So if whatever happens, if like things go down badly and markets collapse even much more than they are doing right now, we will certainly sit this one out and wait until things recover. But that's just a high level comment. So yeah, right now everything is about scaling things up, getting the company ready for scale, and getting ready for mainnet launch. And then the right way to think about mainnet launch is it's really just that will be the hyper scaling moment of the company to some sense, right? Because it's a huge liquidity event for the project for sure. If you do the math, even if it goes like not incredibly well, if we don't make too much noise and we just launch a token, it'd still be a huge liquidity event, and we can basically rocket start everything we're doing at this point already at quite some scale and kind of 10x, 100x that quite quickly. So right now, other than just building things, it's also getting, for example, the features in the app to product market fit in different markets, and kind of making sure that when we are ready to scale things up, that things don't blow up to some degree.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's a good view of sort of what's coming up in the immediate future. So I know we're up on time, but Alex, want to thank you so much again for coming on and spending the time and talking about WorldCoin and telling a little bit about your story. Where can people go, to follow on WorldCoin's journey, on your journey? And I think probably, not if you're in the US, but maybe if you're in many countries around the world, you might be able to go and actually apply to get an orb and become an orb operator, people might be interested in that. So curious to hear where you want to send people.
Yeah, go to our socials. So the Worldcoin Twitter, Sam's Twitter, my Twitter. And all of those channels are not that active yet, and they will still not be that for a couple of weeks at least. But just follow us, and we will ramp up things in the at least midterm future quite a bit there. Otherwise, on the website, you can apply to become an orb operator. Again, the number of devices is relatively low, and we have a huge amount of applicants. So the probability that you're getting one right now is unfortunately relatively low, but that will change also in the coming 12 months. So yeah, we're excited about everyone who's helping us, who's contributing. You can also apply. We are hiring quite aggressively, both in the US and in Germany, across basically all areas. So yeah, thanks for having me. This was a fun conversation.